Welcome back to my channel. They sold us a fairy tale. The princess escapes the dungeon, finds her prince charming, and rides off into the sunset. Mykelti Brown and David Woolley. The perfect ending after decades of neglect, loneliness, and emotional starvation. That's the story we were handed. But what if I told you the ending hasn't been written yet? And what's coming next doesn't look like a happily ever after at all. Because behind the smiles, the vacations, and the Instagram perfect moments, there's a shadow forming. And that shadow has a name: money. David Woolley is not just a supportive husband with a calm demeanor. He is a self-made millionaire. A man who built an empire with his own hands. Concrete, drywall, contracts, long days, hard decisions, and most importantly, legacy. He has 8 biological children who stood beside him through tragedy, through the loss of their mother, through the years when the foundation of that wealth was being poured brick by brick. Now enter a new reality. Mykelti doesn't come alone. She comes with 6 adult children of her own. 6 lives. 6 futures. 6 financial question marks. And suddenly, the Woolley estate isn't just a family, it's a battlefield. We've received whispers. Quiet, unsettling hints about a document that could change everything. A will. A trust. Paperwork that doesn't care about love, blended families, or fairy tales. A document that could leave Mykelti's children with absolutely nothing. And if that's true, then the smiling family photos start to look a lot more like a ceasefire than peace. Are tensions already boiling behind closed doors? Are Mykelti's children quietly clashing with David's? Is resentment growing in rooms we'll never see on camera? And somewhere on the sidelines, is Mykelti Brown watching it all unfold, amused, bitter, maybe even satisfied, poisoning the well with every whispered doubt? Today, we're not just talking about a marriage. We're talking about an inevitable war. A war over inheritance. Over legacy. Over millions. Blood or bride. Before we crack open the vault and examine the legal realities that could tear this family apart, make sure you're subscribed and notifications are turned on. We're tracking this story closer than anyone else, and trust me, you do not want to miss what happens when the first legal move is made. Like the video, subscribe, and join the channel. Now, let's get into the deep dive. To understand the war that's coming, you have to understand the battlefield. And this battlefield is paved with gold. For years, we watched Mykelti live in a state of scarcity. With Mykelti, everything was limited: attention, affection, resources, money. Love felt rationed. Security was an illusion. Then David entered the picture, and suddenly the narrative flipped overnight. Boats, vacations, new homes, expensive dates. Abundance replaced survival. But here's the truth no one likes to say out loud. In wealthy families, marriage isn't just about love. It's about assets. And that's where the fairy tale crashes headfirst into the cold wall of forensic accounting. David Woolley is not Mykelti Brown. Mykelti deals in chaos, failed ventures, and debt. David deals in structure, ownership, and protection. This isn't reality TV money that appears and disappears between seasons. This is generational wealth. And that wealth was built with a specific future in mind. One designed for 8 people, David's children. Now do the math. 8 children on one side, 6 on the other. 14 adult heirs with bills, dreams, mortgages, and expectations. From a romance novel perspective, it's a big, happy, blended family. From an estate lawyer's perspective, it's a nightmare. Imagine being one of David's children. You watched your father work himself to exhaustion. You lost your mother. You protected your family's privacy, while strangers speculated from the outside. You believed that one day, the legacy would pass to you, not as a gift, but as something earned through loyalty and sacrifice. And then suddenly, a reality TV star enters the picture. With cameras, with controversy, with adult children who already have a biological father. Children who've been on television for over a decade. Children whose weddings, lifestyles, and safety nets could now be tied, even indirectly, to your father's fortune. The question that keeps the Woolley kids awake at night is brutal but simple. Why should my father's money clean up Mykelti Brown's mess? That's where the real tension lives. Not in the smiles, not in the Disney trips, but in the quiet moments where everyone knows what's at stake and no one dares say it out loud. Because here's the legal reality. Loving a stepchild is not the same as adopting one. And at this stage in life, adoption isn't happening. Legally speaking, Christine's children are strangers to the Woolley estate, unless a very specific document says otherwise. And that brings us to the ironclad wall. A man of David's age, experience, and net worth does not walk down the aisle unprotected. Not if his lawyers are doing their jobs. Prenuptial agreements, trusts, separate property clauses, everything owned before marriage, the business, the investments, the real estate, remains his. And if the will wasn't updated to include Christine's children explicitly, the law is unforgiving. The money follows the bloodline, which raises an uncomfortable question no one wants to ask. Is Christine living in luxury or living as a guest? Is her name on the deed or just on the invite list? If the unthinkable happened, would she be embraced as a grieving widow or seen as the final obstacle between the Woolley children and their inheritance? And here's the uncomfortable contrast. For all the criticism aimed at Robin Brown, there's one thing she did right. She secured the legal marriage. Paperwork, protection, position. Christine may have one love, but did she secure power? Because fairy tales don't survive probate court. And when money, legacy, and blood collide, love is never the deciding factor. This story isn't over. It's just getting started. She didn't just secure the love, she secured the assets. Robin made sure her children were legally adopted by Mykelti, permanently severing their ties to their biological father and locking in their place within the Brown inheritance. That was strategy. That was paperwork. That was protection. Christine's children don't have that. With David Woolley, there are no adoptions, no legal guarantees, no safety net. Everything they have access to right now exists at the mercy of one thing only, David's generosity. And generosity has a very short shelf life once attorneys enter the room. Now, let's talk about the first red flag everyone seems to be ignoring, the timeline. This romance moved fast. Too fast. They met. They fell hard. They bought a house. They got married. In the legal world, speed is the enemy of security. When emotions move faster than contracts, someone always loses. And let's be honest about where Christine was mentally and emotionally at that time. She was desperate for love, starved for affection, finally chosen after years of rejection. A person in that state is not scrutinizing clauses and contingencies. They're looking at the ring, not the fine print. It is highly likely Christine signed documents she barely processed. Documents stating that David's business, his premarital assets, his empire, are completely off-limits. And that's where the resentment begins to simmer. Picture the Thanksgiving table. Woolley children on one side, Brown children on the other. The Woolley kids know something the Brown kids don't have to think about. Every dollar David spends on Mykelti's twins, on Peyton's ventures, on trips, housing, or help, is a dollar not going into the Woolley family trust. This isn't emotional, it's mathematical. A zero-sum game. Christine thought she escaped the scarcity mindset when she left Flagstaff and Mykelti. But what if she didn't escape it at all? What if she just walked into a far more sophisticated, high-stakes version of the same struggle? Because here's the part people don't want to say out loud. To the Woolley heirs, Christine's children aren't bonuses. They're not cute add-ons. They're a threat. An invasion. These are adult children with large personalities and even larger platforms. They monetize family drama. They speak publicly. They spill private moments for clicks, views, and Patreon subscriptions. Meanwhile, David Woolley built his reputation on privacy, discipline, and hard work. Ask yourself honestly, do you think his biological children are okay watching their father's name dragged into tabloid headlines every time Peyton does an interview or Mykelti drops tea behind a paywall? There's a theory circulating quietly in Utah, not on YouTube thumbnails, but in local circles, that David is compartmentalizing his life. He loves Christine, yes. But the money? The money belongs to the people who were there when the drywall dust was thick and the days were brutal. If that theory is true, then Christine is walking a tightrope with no net. She's betting everything on David's continued goodwill. But what happens when the honeymoon phase ends? What happens when the cameras become exhausting? When the chaos becomes too loud? To understand why this matters, you have to understand the psychology of a self-made construction tycoon. Drywall isn't glamorous. It's early mornings, broken bodies, managing crews, fighting for bids, surviving downturns. David didn't win a lottery. He scraped his wealth out of walls across the West. Men who build money that way see it differently. To them, money is stored labor, stored sacrifice, stored life force. Giving that away to someone who didn't earn it, someone who married into it, goes against everything they believe. And suddenly, David's children don't look like villains. They look like guardians. Ask yourself, if your father married a reality TV star with 6 adult children, a chaotic ex-husband, and non-stop public exposure, would you smile politely, or would you quietly call a lawyer? There are no heroes here, just people protecting what they believe is theirs. Christine's sacrifice in this marriage may be invisible right now. She gained a husband, but did she lose her autonomy? With Cody, she was financially mistreated, but she was scrappy. She hustled. She had her own momentum. Now she's resting inside David's world of comfort. But luxury can be a cage. If her name isn't on the estate, then her lifestyle exists at the mercy of his heartbeat. And that's a terrifying place to be when 8 other people have a prior claim to the throne. Look closely at Christine in recent photos. Past the smile. Is there tension around the eyes? Is she overcompensating? A secure woman is relaxed. A woman fighting to keep her position performs. And Christine has been performing her entire life. First for Cody, then for the cameras. Now, possibly for financial survival. But the spark that ignites this powder keg isn't coming from Christine or David. It's coming from the children. Specifically, the collision of 2 very different worlds. Whispers are growing louder about the first crack in the facade, a rumored confrontation involving Mykelti. And if you know Mykelti, that shouldn't surprise you. She's outspoken, unfiltered, never afraid to insert herself into the center of the narrative. Every great fire starts with a single spark. Sources on the periphery of the family describe a tense family gathering, maybe a barbecue, maybe a birthday, maybe just a Sunday dinner. The details vary, but the tension doesn't. The situation allegedly involved Mykelti and one of David's older daughters, a daughter known for being fiercely protective of her father. David's kids watched him grieve. They watched him grind. They protect his resources and his emotional stability like a fortress. Enter Mykelti. Bold. Opinionated. Accustomed to attention. Comfortable discussing family matters publicly and monetizing them. To a family that values privacy and restraint, this is oil on fire. The rumor suggests a verbal clash. A moment where the united family illusion shattered. Where it was implied, not said outright, but clearly felt, that the Brown children were getting too comfortable. Treating David's empire like an open buffet. The word gold digger may not have been spoken about Christine, but it was reportedly implied about the adult children circling too close to David's wallet. Imagine the silence at the table. A sideways glance. A sharp comment. A line crossed. Why Mykelti? Because she represents everything the Woolley children likely resent. Monetization, exposure, entitlement, and noise. Patreon culture colliding with generational wealth. And once that line is crossed, once resentment is spoken, there is no going back. This isn't a fairy tale anymore. It's a slow-burning inheritance war. And we're only at the first spark. It's offensive. That's the word no one wants to use. But it's the truth. David's children are watching their father's private life get turned into content. And they understand something very clearly. Content equals cash for Mykelti, but it equals stress, exposure, and reputational damage for David. If this confrontation really happened, and where there's smoke, there's usually fire, then it confirms what many suspected all along. This blended family is not nearly as seamless as the wedding special tried to sell us. The smiles were staged. The unity was performative. And the cracks were always there. To understand why this collision was inevitable, we have to talk about psychology, specifically financial trauma. Look at the Brown children.
Paidon, Mykelti, Gwendolyn.
They were raised in chaos. Chronic instability. A father who made reckless financial decisions, bounced the family across state lines, dodged debts, and chased half-baked schemes. That kind of upbringing leaves scars. It creates scarcity trauma. And when someone with scarcity trauma suddenly steps into an environment of abundance, David's world, they often don't know how to behave. They overconsume. They cling. They assume the money will never run out because they've never seen stability modeled correctly. David's children are the opposite. They grew up with abundance discipline. They know the money exists, but they also know the labor behind it. They respect the grind. To them, wealth isn't a vibe, it's a responsibility. And when they look at the Brown kids, they don't see equals. They see tourists wandering through a country they helped build. That is the core disconnect. Mykelti can say we're one big happy family all day long, but unity requires shared values. And when it comes to money, privacy, and work ethic, the values of the Brown children and the Woolley children are fundamentally opposed. Now, let's talk about David Woolley himself, the man behind the smile. On camera, David is agreeable,
Calm,
supportive. But no one builds a multi-million-dollar construction business by being passive. That man didn't survive decades in a brutal industry by being a pushover. And if you slow the footage down, freeze frame the moments when the Brown kids are loud, chaotic, demanding, something changes. Look at his eyes. Is that affection? Or is it fatigue? Body language experts talk about micro-expressions, the truth leaking out for half a second before the mask snaps back on. There are moments where David looks strained, like a man who signed up for marriage and accidentally joined a traveling circus. And his children see it. They see their father's energy being siphoned off. They see reality TV feeding on him, and that fuels their resentment. Because if David's health were to decline, and yes, stress absolutely kills, they won't blame biology. They'll blame the cameras. They'll blame the intrusion. And they'll blame the Brown kids. But there's an even darker force looming over this entire situation.
Cody Brown.
Do not believe for a second that Cody has moved on. Narcissists don't move on, they hover. They obsess. They wait. And Cody is watching this unfold with a calculator in one hand and his phone in the other. This is the chapter called The Poison. Cody can't attack David openly without looking like a bitter ex, so he does what narcissists do best: psychological warfare. Whisper campaigns. Triangulation. Imagine the messages he's sending to his biological children, Gwen, Isabel, and especially Truly. David's nice, but he's not your blood. When it really matters, he'll choose his own kids. You should be careful. You still belong with us. This is textbook manipulation. Cody knows David has zero legal obligation to those children, and he weaponizes that fact. Every seed of doubt he plants keeps the kids emotionally tethered to him. Every time David says no, sets a boundary, or disciplines one of the younger kids, Cody's voice echoes in their heads. See? I told you he doesn't really love you. And now we reach the nightmare scenario. The one lawyers dread and families avoid discussing. Truly Brown. She's a minor. She lives in David's home, eats his food, sleeps under his roof, sees him as a father figure. But legally, he is nothing to her. If something happened to Christine, a question no one wants to ask, but everyone must. Who gets Truly? The law is merciless. She goes to Cody Brown. Imagine the trauma. Police at the door. Truly being removed from David's home and sent back to Cody and Robin's house. This isn't just emotional devastation, it's financial. Child support flows with custody. TV money follows the child. And if David tried to fight for her, he has no standing. He's a step-parent. And Cody would never relinquish his rights, because control is the point. Truly becomes a pawn. And Christine knows this. That fear, the terror of losing Truly, is likely driving her to push for more security, more assets, more guarantees, more promises from David. But that pushing irritates the Woolley heirs. They don't see a scared mother. They see a woman trying to rewrite inheritance law to correct the mistakes of her first marriage. They see their father's estate being used as insurance against Cody Brown. And Cody knows it. He doesn't need to lift a finger to destroy the peace in David's household. He just has to exist. He just has to remind everyone that biology, in the end, trumps everything. So here we are, a powder keg. On one side, the Woolley 8, guarding their birthright, resentful of the cameras, suspicious of motives. On the other, the Brown 6, scarcity traumatized, desperate for security, quietly manipulated by their father. And in the middle, David Woolley, a man who thought he was marrying the woman he loved, only to discover he'd become the CEO of a blended family corporation facing a hostile takeover. The honeymoon is over. Real life has arrived. And real life involves bills, boundaries, beneficiaries, and bloodlines. We're likely looking at a 5-year timeline before this explodes publicly. But the cracks are already visible. The only question is this: when the first medical emergency happens, or when the first major financial disagreement erupts, who will still be standing in the house on the hill? To understand the scale of the war that's coming, we have to look at the battlefield itself. The assets. The castle. This isn't just a house. It's a symbol. And as we move into the final phase of this investigation, we need to be very clear about one thing. When the will is finally read, the battle for the house will be the bloodiest chapter of this entire saga. To understand the scale of the war that's coming, we have to examine the battlefield itself, the assets. Specifically, the castle. This isn't just a home perched on a hill in Utah. For Christine, it represents something she's never truly had before. Safety. Stability. Being chosen. For decades, she lived in basements literally and metaphorically. Hidden. Minimized. Overlooked. Now she wakes up looking out over what feels like a kingdom. But here's the question no one is asking out loud. Whose kingdom is it? In blended families, real estate is almost always the flashpoint. And this house is the fuse. To Christine, it's a shelter. A sanctuary. To the Woolley 8, it's capital.
Equity.
Liquid wealth waiting to be distributed. And that difference in perception is what turns love stories into lawsuits. Here's the legal nightmare scenario that has played out in courtrooms across America thousands of times. The life estate clause. David, being a prudent and well-advised man, may have structured his estate so that if he passes first, Christine is allowed to live in the house until she dies. On paper, it sounds fair, even romantic. In reality, it's a cage. Christine wouldn't be able to sell the house. She couldn't borrow against the equity to help her children. She wouldn't truly own it. She would be a tenant, living in a property legally controlled by David's children. Imagine the friction. The roof needs repairs. Christine has to call David's eldest son, the executor, to approve the expense. The Woolley children watch their inheritance bleed away in maintenance costs for a woman who is not their mother. Every dollar spent becomes a grievance. Every repair becomes resentment. They wait. They wait for her to leave. They wait for her to pass. Not out of cruelty, but because the math incentivizes it. This is how family dinners turn into depositions. Now, let's project this forward. We call this the 5-year war. Right now, the cameras are rolling. The checks are clearing. Everyone is smiling. But 5 years from now, reality TV fame will fade. The sister wives' money will dry up. Christine will no longer be the primary earner. She will be financially dependent on the Woolley estate. And then comes the shift. A medical emergency. A sudden illness. An accident. If David becomes incapacitated, who holds power of attorney? Christine, or his eldest son? If it's the son, Christine loses control of the finances overnight. The checkbook closes. She could find herself asking for grocery money from the very people she currently calls her bonus children. This is the tragedy of the second wife. You are the queen of the heart, but often the pauper of the estate. We don't need a crystal ball to see how this ends. We just need history. Look at Robin Williams' estate. He loved his wife. He loved his children. And yet, after his death, a vicious legal war erupted. Over the house, over personal belongings, even over his wedding tuxedo. The children saw the widow as an interloper. The widow saw the children as vultures trying to evict her from her home. Or look at the Kardashian-Jenner dynasty. When Robert Kardashian Sr. died, the division of assets created wounds that never truly healed, and that was a family that claimed unity. Or more recently, Lisa Marie Presley's estate. A grandmother, Priscilla Presley, locked in a legal battle with her own granddaughter over a trust. If blood relatives can tear each other apart over money, do you really believe the Woolley children and the Brown children will hesitate to lawyer up? These cases prove one thing: grief doesn't unite families when millions are at stake. Grief makes people paranoid,
Territorial.
defensive, and in the Woolley-Brown merger, the territory is vast. The construction company, the equipment, the land, the residuals, the personal property. Let's return to the construction king profile one final time. David's business is his identity. It's his life's work. And he almost certainly wants it run by his bloodline. He does not want Paydon Brown or Mykelti Brown anywhere near the boardroom. He does not want Cody Brown's offspring making decisions about drywall, contracts, and labor bids. So the will likely locks Christine's children out of the business entirely. Here's the problem. The business generates the income. If Christine is given a fixed allowance while the Woolley children receive business profits, the lifestyle disparity will become impossible to ignore. Picture of future Christmas. The Woolley kids arrive in brand new trucks paid for by the family company. The Brown kids arrive stressed, in debt, wondering why their mother didn't secure a future for them. This is the psychology of the disinherited.
Paydon.
Gwendolyn, Mykelti. They already feel abandoned by one father. If they feel financially abandoned by their stepfather, that resentment won't land on David. It will land on Christine. Why didn't you protect us? Why did you sign that prenup? Why did you trust him more than you trusted us? And Cody will be there, waiting. He'll say, I didn't have money, but at least I didn't dangle millions in front of you and leave you with nothing. He will weaponize their poverty against Christine. That is the narcissist's final revenge. He doesn't need to win. He just needs Christine to lose. So, what's the final verdict? We want to believe the fairy tale. We want to believe love conquers all. We want to believe David Woolley is the savior who erases the sins of the past. But in high-net-worth blended families, contracts speak louder than vows. A will is sitting in a safe right now. It's a ticking time bomb. And the fuse? It's already lit. There is a storm gathering over Flagstaff and Utah, and this one isn't made of rain or wind. It's a storm of affidavits, depositions, contested wills, and lawyers circling quietly in the background. The real question isn't if this family will eventually fight over money. The real question is how. Will it unfold as a cold war, years of silence, distance, and quiet resentment? Or will it explode into a hot war of lawsuits, leaked documents, and tabloid chaos? This ending hasn't been filmed yet. But make no mistake, the script has already been drafted, and it wasn't written by TLC. It was written by attorneys. And in that script, there are clear winners and devastating losers. Right now, the Woolley children hold the home field advantage. They have the bloodline. They have the history. They have the origin story. Christine's children, by contrast, are the away team, fighting not for dominance, but simply for a place on the roster. And that brings us to the debate that will define the next era of sister wives. Are you Team Christine, believing that as David's wife, she deserves half of everything, and that her children deserve a slice of the future they now live inside? Or are you Team Woolley, believing David's wealth belongs solely to the children who were there long before the cameras, and that Christine's kids are entitled to nothing at all? Comment Team Blood or Team Love down below. Tell me who you think deserves the fortune. And if you want updates on the alleged Mykelti fight as those details develop, make sure you subscribe and hit that bell. Because we don't just watch this show, we investigate it. Now, to understand the storm approaching the Woolley estate, we have to stop guessing about the future and start studying the past. History has a terrifying habit of repeating itself, especially when blended families collide with fame and sudden fortune. We don't need speculation. We have a blueprint: the Presley Wars. The parallels between the Brown-Woolley merger and the Presley estate battle are chilling. In both cases, you have the patriarch who built the empire. In this case, David Woolley. You have the later-in-life wife who brings love and complexity. And you have biological heirs who view the estate not as shared property, but as a birthright. For Elvis, it was Lisa Marie versus Priscilla. For David Woolley, it's a silent faction of Woolley daughters versus Christine. And just like the Presley War, this isn't really about money. It's about legacy. To the Woolley children, their father's construction empire isn't just a balance sheet. It is the physical proof of their mother's sacrifice, the woman who helped build that life and is no longer here to defend her place in it. So when Christine walks into that home, she isn't just a new wife. On a subconscious level, she represents an overwrite, a replacement, a revision of memory. And this is where the legal weapon of undue influence enters the chat. Undue influence is the argument that someone was manipulated into changing financial decisions due to emotional dependence. Look at the optics. David is older. He's newly famous. He's surrounded by cameras, attention, red carpets, and a level of admiration he never experienced before Christine. A skilled attorney could argue, 5 or 10 years down the road, that David was seduced not just by love, but by fame, and that the reality TV machine pushed him to make decisions that contradicted decades of careful planning. It sounds dramatic, but in high-stakes probate court, it's routine. And here's the twist. The biggest liability in this entire scenario isn't Cody. It isn't Robin. It's Paydon Brown. Paydon is conflict-forged. He grew up fighting for attention. He speaks publicly. He has no filter. On reality TV, that's an asset. In high-net-worth estate planning, it's a nuclear bomb. Imagine David trying to close a massive commercial contract, projecting stability and professionalism, while Paydon goes live on TikTok, joking about money, hinting that dad pays for everything, or spilling private family tension. In that moment, David isn't just embarrassed, he's compromised. And the Woolley children are watching. Every comment, every podcast, every joke.
Cataloged.
Psychologically, Paydon is searching for a father figure he can respect, but he's also asserting dominance. He's physically imposing, much like David. There's an unspoken competition there. In clips where they appear together, when Paydon gets loud, David goes quiet. That silence isn't weakness, it's assessment. And if David decides Paydon is too much of a liability, he'll cut him off. If that happens, Christine is forced into an impossible position, husband or son. This is the stepchild dilemma, the same wound Christine carries from Cody rejecting her children. She vowed never to let another man hurt her kids. So if David draws a boundary, Christine will fight back. And the soulmate narrative collapses under the weight of maternal instinct. The Woolley children know this. They're patient. They're playing the long game. Now, let's talk about Gwendolyn. Where Paydon uses a sledgehammer, Gwendolyn uses a scalpel. She analyzes. She monetizes. She reacts. From the Woolley family's perspective, she's a security breach. Every dinner conversation becomes potential Patreon content. Every private moment becomes analysis. That creates a surveillance state. And surveillance creates stress. Stress affects health, judgment, and behavior. If David feels like he's living in a fishbowl, he retreats to his office, to properties without cameras, to spaces where he can breathe. And physical separation is often the first step toward financial separation. That's when trusts get adjusted. Assets get isolated. Lines get redrawn. And remember, construction wealth is cyclical. Boom and bust. If a recession hits and liquidity tightens, luxury is the first thing to go. Trips.
Boats.
Nannies. If David tightens a belt, Christine, shaped by years of scarcity, may interpret that not as prudence, but as withdrawal of love. That's how trauma rewrites perception. Which brings us to the NDA theory. It is highly probable that adult Brown children were asked to sign non-disclosure agreements. This is standard but poisonous. NDAs turn family into liabilities. If one is violated, the lawsuit wouldn't come from a stranger. It would come from David. Imagine the optics of David Woolley suing Christine's son. The marriage wouldn't survive it. The marriage wouldn't survive it. Now add a potential spin-off show.
Cameras on job sites.
Equipment used for filming. Properties turned into storylines. That's Cummingling, and Cummingling destroys separate property defenses. One sharp lawyer could argue the business itself became marital property. This is the Trojan horse. And David's children know it. Finally, there's the quiet grief no one talks about. The Woolley heirs. They lost their mother. They don't have a platform. They don't have millions validating their pain. They watch a stranger step into their mother's PLA. Now add a potential spin-off show.
Cameras on job sites.
Equipment used for filming. Properties turned into storylines. That's Cummingling, and Cummingling destroys separate property defenses. One sharp lawyer could argue the business itself became marital property. This is the Trojan horse. And David's children know it. Finally, there's the quiet grief no one talks about. The Woolley heirs. They lost their mother. They don't have a platform. They don't have millions validating their pain. They watch a stranger step into their mother's place and be celebrated publicly. That erasure breeds resentment. And when the time comes to divide assets, resentment shows no mercy. So no, this isn't a fairy tale. It's a tragedy in slow motion. The players are set. The motives are clear. The assets are massive. All that's missing is the spark. And judging by Paydon, Gwendolyn, and the silent but watchful Woolley children, that spark is already lit.
So I'll leave you with this.
When the first filing hits, who do you trust to tell you the truth? The tabloids chasing clicks, or the crew that reads the court documents?
Subscribe.
Like. Stay alert. I'm watching the dockets. I'm watching the property records. And when this war goes public, you'll hear it here first. Because in the game of sister wives, you don't win with love. You win with paperwork. I'll see you in the comments.